There is a certain kind of photograph from the mid-20th century that feels like a dream. The colors are rich. The sunlight seems to dance on the turquoise water of the Mediterranean, and the people within them are impossibly beautiful, impossibly wealthy, and impossibly carefree. They are the artifacts of an era we call the jet set, a time when a new class of global royalty reigned from the decks of their yachts and the banquettes of Parisian nightclubs. And in the very center of this dream, you will almost always find her face, a face of serene, almost fragile beauty, framed by impeccably styled hair. Her smile is gentle, her posture perfect. She is Athina Livanos, but the world would know her as Tina Onassis. She was the wife of the Titan, Aristotle Onassis, the elegant masthead on his ship of ambition. Her image was essential to his legend, the quiet aristocratic grace that gave his raw power a veneer of civilization. She was the still calm center of the Onassis hurricane. But a hurricane center is a place of deceptive calm, surrounded on all sides by unimaginable destructive force. While the world watched the storm of Aristotle's life, his epic business deals, his tempestuous love affairs, and his relentless pursuit of power, few noticed the devastating price being paid by the woman at its heart. Her story is often treated as a preamble to more famous tragedies, those of her children, or of the famous women who succeeded her. But Tina's story is not a preamble. It is the foundational text, the haunting first chapter in the great dark saga of the Onassis family. It is the story of a gilded cage and of the beautiful bird who never truly learned to sing. Join me as we unravel the life of Tina Onassis Niarchos, the original yacht princess, a woman whose silent suffering became the inheritance of a dynasty and whose life serves as a chilling testament to the truth that in a world of infinite riches, the one thing you can't buy is a way out. To truly understand Tina, you must first understand the world she was born into, the fiercely proud, insular, and staggeringly wealthy universe of the Greek shipping magnates. This wasn't just a business, it was a tribe, a global network of families, the Livanos, the Niarchos, the Lemos clans, who controlled the arteries of world trade from offices in London, New York, and Piraeus. They were the modern-day Argonauts, their fortunes made and lost on the tides of the global economy. They were bound by tradition, by arranged marriages, and by an unwritten code of honor and rivalry as intricate as any ancient court. At the absolute apex of this world stood the Livanos family. Stavros Livanos was a patriarch of the old school, stern, pious, and universally respected. He was considered the admiral of the fleet, the gold standard of shipping royalty. Unlike the more flamboyant figures who would emerge after World War II, Livanos cultivated an aura of immense quiet authority. His fortune was generational, his reputation spotless. He had two daughters, Eugenie and Athina, and they were the crown jewels of his dynasty. From birth, their lives were mapped out for them. They were raised in a cocoon of disciplined luxury, shuttled between homes in London and Paris, educated at the most exclusive European finishing schools. They were taught to be perfect hostesses, to speak multiple languages fluently, to be charming but demure, and above all, to understand that their ultimate duty was to marry well. They were not individuals with their own dreams, they were strategic assets in a dynastic game. Athina, known to all as Tina, was the younger, born in 1929. She possessed a striking, delicate beauty and a quiet, observant nature that belied a steely self-control. She was groomed from girlhood for a singular purpose: to unite the Livanos Empire with another of equal or greater standing, securing the family's dominance for the next generation. Meanwhile, in the chaos of post-war Europe, a new kind of force was gathering on the horizon, a man whose ambition was a raging fire, unquenchable and untamed. His name was Aristotle Socrates Onassis. He was everything the established shipping families were not. He was not born to wealth. He was a Greek refugee from Smyrna, a survivor of the Turkish massacres, who had arrived in Argentina with less than $100 to his name. He had built his empire from nothing, through a combination of brilliant intuition, staggering nerve, and a complete disregard for the rules. He bought his first ships when others were selling. He built the world's first supertankers, and he wasn't afraid to engage in legally dubious but fantastically profitable ventures, like his infamous whaling fleet that flouted international regulations. He was a force of nature, crude, charismatic, bursting with a life force that was both intoxicating and dangerous. The old guard Greek families, like the Livanos clan, looked down on him. They saw him as a vulgar upstart, a pirate in a Savile Row suit, but they could not ignore his rapidly accumulating power and his staggering fortune. Onassis knew that to truly conquer their world, he needed more than money. He needed their legitimacy. He needed the one thing he couldn't buy, class. And he saw the ultimate path to that legitimacy in the 17-year-old daughter of Stavros Livanos. He set his sights on Tina with the same relentless focus he applied to a business deal. She was just a teenager. He was 40, a worldly man with a complex past. Her father was deeply hesitant. Onassis was a wild card, a man of base appetites. But the strategic advantages of the union were undeniable. The merger of the Onassis and Livanos fleets would create a maritime empire of unprecedented scale. The old patriarch relented. The deal was struck. In 1946, in a society wedding in New York that was the talk of the town, the 17-year-old shipping princess was married to the 40-year-old shipping king. For Tina, it was the end of her girlhood and the beginning of a life sentence in a golden prison. The first decade of their marriage was the stuff of legends, the high water mark of the jet-set era. With the beautiful and poised Tina as his wife, Aristotle Onassis completed his transformation. She was his greatest asset, the living proof that he had finally arrived. She smoothed his rough edges, charmed his powerful friends, and oversaw the creation of their public image as the world's most glamorous couple. The centerpiece of this image was the yacht he bought and extravagantly refurbished in her honor, the Christina. It was more than a boat, it was a floating declaration of his power. He poured millions into its transformation, creating a vessel of almost decadent luxury. It featured a mosaic swimming pool that could be raised to deck level to become a dance floor, an El Greco painting hanging in the main salon, bathrooms with solid gold taps, and, most infamously, bar stools in the lounge upholstered in the skin of a whale's scrotum. The yacht was a perfect reflection of its owner, part breathtaking luxury, part vulgar provocation. And Tina was its serene, flawless queen. She managed a large staff with quiet efficiency, planning elaborate dinners and hosting a guest list that was a who's who of the 20th century. Winston Churchill found solace on its decks in his later years, painting the seascapes. Greta Garbo would hide away in its cabins. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, John F. Kennedy. They all came to pay court to King Aristotle, and all were greeted by the soft-spoken, elegant Queen Tina. Eyewitness accounts from this period describe her as a woman of almost preternatural calm. While Ari held court, booming with laughter, telling stories, and negotiating deals over cigars and brandy, Tina would sit quietly, observing, ensuring every glass was filled, every guest was comfortable. She was a master of the soft arts of diplomacy, a skill essential in managing her husband's explosive temperament. In 1948, she fulfilled her primary dynastic duty, giving birth to a son and heir, Alexander. 2 years later, in 1950, a daughter, Christina, was born. On the surface, the family portrait was complete. They had magnificent homes around the world. A lavish apartment on Avenue Foch in Paris, a villa in Monte Carlo, and their private island sanctuary of Scorpios in Greece. But behind the closed doors of their palatial residences, the fairy tale was a facade. Onassis was a doting father in his own way, particularly to his son, but he was a deeply flawed husband. His philandering was constant and barely concealed. For years, Tina bore the infidelity with the stoicism expected of a woman of her class and generation. It was the unspoken bargain, but the bargain would be broken by a woman whose voice and whose passion was simply too loud to ignore. In 1957, at a ball in Venice, Aristotle Onassis was introduced to the world's most famous opera singer, Maria Callas. The encounter was electric. Like him, Callas was a Greek who had conquered the world through sheer undeniable talent and a will of iron. She was a tempestuous, brilliant, and deeply emotional artist. In each other, they recognized a fellow force of nature. Their affair began shortly thereafter, and it was a conflagration, a love story of operatic intensity filled with passionate declarations, violent arguments, and public spectacles. Onassis was utterly consumed by her. She was not a discreet dalliance. She was a rival queen. The affair became the great defining crisis of Tina's life. The moment of ultimate public humiliation came in the summer of 1959. Onassis, in an act of breathtaking cruelty and arrogance, insisted on inviting both Callas and her husband, Giovanni Meneghini, to join his annual summer cruise on the Christina. Also on board was Sir Winston Churchill. For 3 agonizing weeks, Tina was forced to sail the Mediterranean, playing the perfect hostess, while her husband flaunted his affair with Callas for all to see. Guests on the yacht would later recount the excruciating atmosphere. They spoke of Ari and Maria singing and laughing together late into the night, while Tina would retreat to her cabin, a silent, graceful ghost at her own feast. She never made a scene. She never broke down in public. She maintained her composure with a dignity that was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. But this public dethronement was a wound from which she could not recover. When the yacht finally docked in Istanbul, she disembarked. She went to Paris and visited her parents. Soon after, she flew to New York and filed for divorce, citing adultery. The ensuing legal battle was fodder for tabloids around the globe. She had endured years of his faithlessness, but the public performance with Callas was an act of psychological warfare she could no longer withstand. In 1960, the divorce was finalized. Tina Onassis, at the age of 31, was free. But the damage was done not only to her, but to the 2 children who had been silent witnesses to their parents' emotional war. Alexander and Christina were collateral damage in the epic drama of their parents' lives. Raised by a legion of nannies and tutors, they grew up in a world of material abundance and profound emotional scarcity. Alexander, the heir apparent, fared better. He was his father's golden boy, confident and charming. He inherited his father's love for adventure and became a skilled pilot. But Christina was a far more fragile soul. She worshipped her powerful, larger-than-life father, but always felt she was a disappointment to him. Her relationship with her mother was even more fraught with complexity. She saw in Tina a model of beauty and elegance she could never hope to achieve. She also saw her mother's deep unhappiness and internalized it. Biographies of Christina are filled with stories of a lonely little girl, desperate for affection, who would overeat for comfort, beginning a lifelong struggle with her weight and self-esteem. Tina, a product of her own emotionally reserved upbringing and consumed by her own pain, seemed incapable of providing the warmth and validation her daughter so desperately craved. The seeds of Christina's future tragedies were sown in this emotionally barren soil. After leaving Onassis, Tina sought refuge in a world that was the antithesis of his. In 1961, she married a British aristocrat, John Spencer Churchill, the Marquis of Blandford, and heir to the Duke of Marlborough. By marrying him, she became the Marchioness of Blandford and the chatelaine of the magnificent Blenheim Palace. It was a life of country weekends, noble titles, and the cool, damp traditions of the English upper class. It was a world of order and predictability, a desperate flight from the Greek chaos she had known. But this placid existence could not heal her inner wounds. The marriage failed to provide the connection she sought, and they divorced in 1971. She was once again alone, and a far darker chapter was about to begin. The rivalry between Aristotle Onassis and Stavros Niarchos was legendary. They were the two titans of Greek shipping, locked in a bitter lifelong battle for wealth, prestige, and power. They competed for bigger tankers, more audacious deals, and more glamorous wives. And in a twist worthy of a Greek playwright, the two Livanos sisters had married these two arch-rivals. Tina was Mrs. Onassis, and her older sister Eugenie was Mrs. Niarchos. In May 1970, this rivalry took a sinister turn. Eugenie Niarchos, then 44, was found dead on the Niarchos family's private Greek island, Spetsopola. The initial reports claimed she had died from an overdose of barbiturates, but the story quickly unraveled. An autopsy demanded by her family revealed extensive bruising all over her body. The investigation was headline news across Europe. Stavros Niarchos was subjected to intense questioning by prosecutors. He claimed the bruises were the result of his frantic attempts to revive her. The investigation was eventually closed, and Niarchos was formally cleared, but a dark cloud of suspicion never fully dissipated. For Tina, the loss of her beloved sister under such disturbing circumstances was a shattering blow. Her next move, however, would shock the world and remains one of the most mysterious and unsettling episodes in this entire saga. Just 14 months after her sister's death, in 1971, Tina married her widowed brother-in-law, Stavros Niarchos. She became the new Mrs. Niarchos, sleeping in the same houses, attended by the same staff as her late sister. The psychological and moral implications of this union were staggering. The press and high society were aghast. Why would she do it? Was it a cold-blooded merger, the final consolidation of the Livanos-Niarchos shipping interests? Was it a desperate act of two people clinging together in the wake of immense tragedy? Or was it something far more disturbing? A pact to keep dark family secrets buried forever. The true motivation remains locked in the past, but it was a decision that sealed Tina's fate, tying her irrevocably to a world of immense wealth and pervasive tragedy. If she had hoped to find a safe harbor with Niarchos, she was catastrophically wrong. The gods of tragedy were not yet finished with her. On January 22, 1973, her son, Alexander Onassis, the handsome 24-year-old heir who was the one bright light in her life, prepared for a short test flight in his private plane at Athens airport. Moments after takeoff, the plane faltered and crashed onto the runway. Alexander suffered catastrophic head injuries. Tina and Ari rushed to the hospital. A temporary truce declared in their long Cold War. They stood vigil together, bringing in the world's most renowned brain surgeons, in a desperate, futile attempt to save him. But his injuries were too severe. He was brain dead. The agonizing decision was made to disconnect life support. The death of Alexander was the blow that broke the spine of the Onassis dynasty. It utterly destroyed Aristotle Onassis. He lost his will to live and followed his son to the grave just 2 years later. For Tina, the loss of her child was the final unendurable sorrow. She had now lost her sister and her son. She had survived 2 broken marriages and a lifetime of emotional turmoil. This loss plunged her into a deep and inconsolable depression. She became a recluse, a wraith drifting through the opulent rooms of the Niarchos mansions in Paris and Saint-Tropez. Moritz. On the 10th of October 1974, just 21 months after her son's death, Tina was found dead in her bedroom in the Niarchos family's mansion in Paris. She was only 45 years old. With a chilling and tragic symmetry, the official cause of death was declared to be a pulmonary edema, likely brought on by an overdose of barbiturates, the same verdict as her sister Eugenie's death. The world that had chronicled her every glamorous move now printed her obituary. The beautiful yacht princess was dead. Many said she had simply died of a broken heart. The life of Tina Onassis Niarchos is a profound and disturbing exploration of the gilded cage. Her story forces us to question our assumptions about wealth and happiness. She was a woman who possessed everything our culture values: beauty, status, and limitless money. Yet her life was a landscape of profound suffering. Her story is a testament to the psychological toll of being treated as a commodity, an object to be acquired and displayed. Her entire identity was defined by the powerful men she was attached to. She was the daughter of Stavros Livanos, the wife of Aristotle Onassis, the wife of the Marquess of Blandford, and finally the wife of Stavros Niarchos. It is difficult to find the authentic Tina underneath all those powerful names. Her tragic legacy was most acutely felt in the life of her daughter, Christina. Christina inherited not only her mother's vast fortune, but her mother's deep-seated sadness and insecurities. She spent her life on a desperate, frantic search for the love and stability she never had, cycling through 4 marriages and battling severe depression. When Christina herself died prematurely at 37, it felt like the inevitable, tragic conclusion to a story that began with her mother's silent sorrow. Tina's life and death established the narrative of the Onassis curse, the idea that the family's immense fortune was tainted by a fate that demanded a price in human suffering, particularly from its women. So, who was the real Tina Onassis? Beyond the paparazzi photos and the society columns, she remains an enigma. She was a woman of incredible self-control and dignity, who navigated a life of intense public scrutiny and private pain with a quiet grace. But she was also, ultimately, a victim of the world she was born into, a world where daughters were bargaining chips and wives were elegant accessories. Her life was a long, slow surrender to the powerful forces around her, a journey that took her from the heights of glamour to the depths of despair. When we look at those old photographs now, her image is haunting. We see the beautiful smile, the perfect pearls, the sun-drenched deck of the yacht. But we can also see the sadness in her eyes, the story of a woman who was a passenger on a spectacular voyage but was never allowed to chart her own course. She was the original princess of the Onassis dynasty, and her story is a chilling reminder that the most beautiful fairy tales can often hide the darkest of truths. Her life was not a dream, it was a tragedy, told in whispers, in a beautiful prison made of gold. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of all is the silence. After the headlines fade and the biographies are written, what remains of Tina is an overwhelming, profound quiet. She left behind no revealing diaries, no tell-all interviews, no letters that rail against her fate. Her inner life is a ghost story, a space we can only populate with our own assumptions. We see her through the eyes of others, defined by the men she married, the rivals she endured, and the children she lost. She is a reflection in a dozen other more brightly lit stories, but the source of that reflection remains in shadow. Her voice is the missing instrument in the tragic opera of her own life. This silence, however, was its own kind of inheritance. It was a legacy of unspoken pain passed down to her daughter, Christina, as surely as the shipping fleets and the Swiss bank accounts. Christina spent her entire life trying to scream loud enough for the both of them, living out the emotional chaos her mother had so rigidly suppressed. She sought love with a desperate, frantic energy, as if trying to fill the void of quiet sorrow her mother had left behind. In this, the Onassis curse reveals itself not as a supernatural fate, but as the simple, devastating truth of inherited trauma, of a sadness so deep it poisons the next generation. So when we look at those photographs one last time, we should see them for what they are. They are not just artifacts of the jet-set dream, they are a warning. They tell us that a cage is still a cage, no matter how beautifully it is gilded. And they show us the face of a woman who was crowned a queen, but was never allowed to be the author of her own story. Her life serves as the ultimate haunting testament that in a world that can sell you everything, the one thing you can never buy is a voice that is truly your own.